the People's Republic of China.
Donald Trump has been in Asia for 6 days, travelling to Malaysia, Japan, South Korea, but always working towards this moment.
Good to see you again.
He wanted to talk trade with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
And we're going to have a very successful meeting, I have no doubt.
Let's hope so, because these are the world's two biggest economies.
But he's a very tough negotiator. That's not good.
Outside their meeting, it was President Trump's negotiating tactics that South Korean protesters were crying out against. Furious that the president was demanding $350 billion worth of investment in the US in return for lower tariffs. But it is the deal with China that is gripping the world, because what these two leaders do and don't agree to doesn't just affect their countries, it ripples out globally. So how did it go?
President Trump, it is a great pleasure for me as well to meet you.
Warm words followed by a stark reality.
Given our different national conditions, we do not always see eye to eye with each other. And it is normal for the two leading economies of the world to have frictions now and then.
What followed was a private 2-hour meeting with no press conference afterwards, but Trump found his way to the media, as he usually does, and started, as ever, with some hyperbole.
But overall, I guess on the scale of from 0 to 10, with 10 being the best, I would say the meeting was a 12. Okay, I think it was a 12.
And there was this on trade.
We have a deal. Now, every year we'll renegotiate the deal, but I think the deal will go on for a long time.
Not so much a full trade deal, but trade truce, lifting blocks on specific sectors. A 1-year pause from China on sweeping controls to critical rare earth minerals. A promise to buy American soybeans again, and lower US tariffs in return for a fentanyl crackdown. The tit-for-tat trade war began in February when President Trump imposed 10% tariffs on Chinese goods. China quickly retaliated. They continued to escalate in March. By mid-April, US tariffs on China had skyrocketed to 145%, and China's on the US to 125%. Both sides rode back in May, with US tariffs on China then settling at an average 57% and China's around 32%. After today's meeting, the average US tariff on China is now down to 47%.
So I think between the United States and China, we're back to where we began.
So does that mean that Donald Trump's strong-arm tactics when it comes to tariffs haven't worked?
You know, Trump is trying to take a different, more muscular approach to tariffs and to trade policy. He's really trying to exert U.S. power. That may help overall, but there are, at times, very specific impacts on certain parts of the U.S. Costs for U.S. companies, costs for U.S. workers, costs for U.S. consumers.
Take China's refusal to buy U.S. soybeans, a pretty muscular retaliation that had threatened to cripple American farmers who will be relieved today. Maybe that gave Trump his 12 out of 10 score. But surely it wasn't entirely cosy. Before the meeting began, the president posted this on Truth Social. The United States has more nuclear weapons than any other country. Russia is second and China is a distant third, but will be even within 5 years. Because of other countries' testing programs, I have instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis. The last test was in 1992 and there has been a moratorium since then. And so President Trump returns to his White House, moving the dial from a trade war to threats of US power in a real war, leaving the world waiting once again on his next move.
And Anushka's at the White House for us now. Anushka, quite a lot of stuff missing in that meeting. That was only 90 minutes long.
Yeah, look, this is quite limited, quite sectoral. Yes, Americans will be able to sell more soybeans. There was also talk of selling computer chips that were previously restricted. But clearly, the trade between these two countries is much bigger than that, the biggest economies in the world. Donald Trump even described the meeting as the meeting of the G2. And as is so often the case, he announces a trade deal, but then the details are hammered out. Take with the UK. We are still negotiating the trade deal announced so long ago. And then there were things that were unsaid. The word TikTok did not come out of Donald Trump's mouth. He is trying to negotiate a reduced ownership for the Chinese side when it comes to the social media giant. They say a deal is done, but we've had no details on that. Now, any minute now, we're expecting the president to land in Marine One back at the White House. And as is so often the case, the tone from what he is saying abroad and the tone as to what is happening here is so starkly different. As he was travelling, a notice was published putting in place the fact that they are going to try to limit the number of refugees coming to this country to 7,500. To put that in context, it was 125,000 under Joe Biden, and the notice makes clear that the vast majority of those will be for white South Africans who, the White House says, are facing unjust discrimination at home, so no room for anyone else, all down to an executive order signed on day one. Once again, he's coming back into something that is likely to be controversial, but that Donald Trump is very outspoken about.
Anushka, watch out for that helicopter. Thank you very much indeed, Deb, at the White House in Washington. Well, earlier I spoke to the Chinese businessman and academic Victor Gao from the Center for China and Globalization in Beijing. He was also a translator for the paramount Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping. I asked him about Donald Trump's meeting with Xi Jinping and his view on the trade war between these two nations.
This trade war was the wrong trade war for the United States to start to fight to start with. China is on the receiving side, and whatever China is doing is in retaliation against the wrongful acts by the United States. And now the United States have felt the heat from the Chinese side, has blinked again and again. I think the United States realized that it is futile for the United States to try to achieve a chokehold against China because China has enough wherewithal to fight back. This is the reason why the two sides have decided to back off from each other, at least temporarily. And I think going forward, the litmus test is whether the United States really honors whatever it has agreed in the summit meeting in the Republic of Korea. And that will decide whether China will again retaliate against whatever the United States may want to change from what they agreed in South Korea.
Hasn't, really the saga, the up and down, the trade war of the last 9 months since Trump took office again shown us, Victor, that actually they do rely on each other. China needs America's markets. America needs China's rare earth metals, just, to mention two items.
Absolutely. China and the United States can do each other better if they really respect each other and deal with each other as equal. If the United States wants to bully China and try to suffocate China, first of all, it will not succeed. Secondly, it will really suffer the retaliation from China. China has never initiated this round of trade war or tariff war. It is always the United States which wants to fight against China. And I hope by now Washington has fully realized it is futile for the United States trying to suppress China by such wrongful acts of tariff war. And China has demonstrated its consistency in terms of its position and policy of fighting back whenever the United States wants to bully China. And China demands to be treated as a complete equal partner with the United States.
Donald Trump, actually to many people's surprise, also announced today on his way back to Washington that he wants to resume nuclear testing immediately after having not done so for 33 years. Now, what does Beijing make of that statement?
China will never use nuclear weapons against any other country ahead of time, and China will never allow any other country which uses nuclear weapon against China to survive China's nuclear retaliation. That means China has built up MAD capabilities to deter any country in the world which may be mad enough to strike China with nuclear weapons. I hope President Trump will get that message, and I hope the United States will never ponder the possibility of using nuclear weapon against China, because that will trigger immediate nuclear annihilation of the United States.
That was Victor Gao, and you can also hear the full discussion of Victor Gao and Dr. Yu Jie from Chatham House that we did on the forecast that should be dropping quite soon. Well, joining me now is Henrietta Levin, who advised Joe Biden on China policy when he was in the White House. She's now a senior fellow covering China at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. Thank you very much for coming on. So, from what you can tell after this meeting, which, you know, they hadn't met for 6.5 years, it was such an important meeting. It lasted only 90 minutes. Who blinked first, do you think?
Unfortunately, I feel like President Xi coming out of this meeting feels like he succeeded in wielding China's market power, in wielding China's choke points with respect to rare earth products, to get the U.S. to back down, to back away from what had been a very aggressive approach to the trade war. And, you know, we can look at what is coming out of this meeting. Donald Trump is celebrating that China has agreed to resume agricultural purchases. They'll buy U.S. soybeans. He's celebrating that China will delay implementation of at least their newest round of export controls on rare earth materials. But this, at best, is just starting to unwind some of the damage caused by the trade war itself. It seems like Trump has totally abandoned his earlier efforts to use the trade war to address the structural economic imbalances in the U.S.-China relationship.
So after all the bluster and all the back and forth on, you know, on tariffs, and we've been talking about this now for almost 10 months, what did Trump actually gain from it?
Well, I think China was very effective in scoping its retaliation over the course of the trade war to target political constituencies that are important to Trump. And so, for example, withdrawing purchase orders for soybeans, I mean, that's important for the American economy, but it's really important for Trump politically. And so I think that Trump may see this as a win in part because it is boosting his political standing with an important constituency, but it's not getting to any of the fundamental economic issues that he has claimed to champion when it comes to reinvigorating American manufacturing.
And the fact that, you know, this is such an important relationship and Trump has been obsessed with China for such a long time, do you think that historians will look back at this moment, you know, of, you know, let's call it a ceasefire or, you know, a Mexican standoff and say, this was the moment that China established itself on the world stage as America's economic equal?
Look, I think that we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that China's economy is itself really struggling. They claim they have 5% growth. That's probably not true. And even if it was, this is a much slower rate of growth than what we saw a few years ago. Youth unemployment is off the charts. So we shouldn't overstate the strength of China's economy, but they have played their cards very well. And we've seen them not only wield their choke points on rare earth materials very effectively in this trade war, but even now more recently trying to control not only the rare earths over which, you know, China has massive market dominance, they're trying to control the technical expertise and the production equipment that anyone would need to try and diversify globally rare earth supply chains.
Right.
So they're trying to lock down that market in a way that has been very effective. So even though, you know, China may not have walked into this trade war playing a stronger hand, I think they've walked away from it feeling very confident.
Just briefly and finally, I don't understand why the Americans or indeed others don't start mining their own rare earth metals, which can be found all over the world, and start processing them. Why continue this reliance on China?
Well, the China production has been cheaper than other sectors were able to produce around the world. And if market incentives are allowed to be the only factor in how these supply chains take shape, then China often does have an opportunity to corner the market. Maybe the silver lining of what we've seen this year is there is a real realization in capitals around the world that this kind of over-reliance on China for production of rare earth materials is entirely unsustainable. Even if you think about this purely from an economic perspective, diversification is an urgent
Right.
must do. And we have seen the administration in Washington take steps in the past few days to try and invigorate a global coalition of countries to hit back against China's export controls and try and build out a global diversified supply chain. But will they succeed while they're also taking on those same partners in all these different trade wars that are playing out around the world? We'll have to see.